George is, in my opinion, the world's #1 expert on YouTube script writing. He's also a strategist who worked with the channel Efficient app on this video, which got 7 times more views than their channel average when it came out. Today we're going to talk to him about the strategies and tools he used to make that happen, and we're going to see how you can apply those things to your channel as well. Let's get started. So George, what was the idea going into this?
The initial thing, the reason I wanted to make this video with Efficient app was because I knew that they held an opinion that kind of went against the grain. And I think this is a really good starting place for, any channel in any niche. If you have a sincerely held belief that doesn't really align with conventional wisdom, I think that is really very ripe territory for making a video. So I'd spent a few days with these guys in person, and we'd spent a lot of time talking about various different, YouTube things. And obviously in the YouTube sphere, everyone uses Notion for planning out their videos and all sorts of things, and like Notion templates. Like I sell them, we all have used them, but it really struck me that these two were like the first real people I'd spoken to who really weren't keen on it. And this was well before we were talking about actually working together. It was clear that this was a sincerely held belief that they don't like the all-in-one tool kind of thing, and they had lots of problems with the way people were using Notion. So when it came to me pitching them to work together, this was the place I wanted to start, and I thought we can make a video here that, yes, is going to be controversial, but not for the sake of it. Like, this is something that really is at the core of who they are as YouTubers and something they really believe, but helpfully, it is also something that's going to ruffle some feathers, and that it very much did.
Yeah, looking at the comments section, it's just filled with very angry Notion users.
Yes, yeah. And I still use Notion, right? This is very much not meant to be a hit piece per se. What it's meant to do is kind of break through the status quo that Notion is the best for everything, and really break down, okay, you can use it for X, Y, Z, A, B, C, but actually maybe there are some better tools that do X, Y, Z, A, B, C individually. So that's the thing that I would say to anyone really who's looking for a video like this, they think, they want to have a better chance of doing well, is thinking like, what is your sincerely held belief that goes against the grain? I know in the case of you, Gwilym, obviously we've talked before about you doing a couple of scripts for Ramit Sethi, and for him, that spiky point of view is not buying a house when he very much could, right? It's this idea that kind of breaks through this established fog that buying a house is the goal. You should have to buy a house. You should want to buy a house. So everyone's got that spiky point of view, and it's just about figuring out what yours is, if that makes sense.
Especially because in the YouTube world, there are so many videos covering like how to set up your Notion, blah, blah, blah. In the finance world, there are so many videos saying, here's exactly how you buy a house. And so walking it back one step and being like, wait, do you actually want to do that? It's like discussing, like, do you actually want to have kids or something like that? It's very polarizing. So what was the starting point for the idea? Was it packaging? Did you have packaging in mind before content, or was it the other way around?
Well, this was a really gradual, organic process. So I remember actually, Gwilym, I was sat next to you at a talk at Vid Summit, which was just about to start, and you like leaned your phone over to me and you showed me a Brian Johnson video that you and the team had just uploaded. And it was a video called AG1 Failed, Here's Why, with a picture of Brian holding a spoon, and it's like an arrow pointing at it and it says scam. And I remember just immediately being really struck by that. And at this point, we didn't know how that video was going to perform. As it turns out, it's performed very well, and it's still doing very well. But that framing of the title was the first thing that really lodged in my mind before I even thought about pitching to work with Efficient app. Something failed. X failed. Here's why. I don't know if that was something that you had been inspired by elsewhere, but certainly for me, that was the point at which I took that inspiration.
Funnily enough, I was in my hotel room looking at different options, and I asked Jamie for his opinion. I was like, Jamie, we've got a bunch of different stuff. I'm trying to clear the fog in my head. Which of these stands out? And Jamie was like, oh, that's nice. I like that.
Interesting.
So it's a team effort.
This was very much...
I don't even remember.
Yeah.
I don't even remember that conversation, but hey, I'll take the credit.
That was the first point, and I kind of locked that away in my brain for later. And this is a thing that I think you should really start to systemize, if you don't already, is just having a place where you can write down title framing, packaging ideas, but really especially title framing. Whenever you see something you like, just make a note of it, because then later on, especially with AI these days, you can literally just feed it a bunch of title formats and say, I'm making a video about X topic. Here are 10 title framings that I like. Create the titles for me, kind of thing. So that was the starting place in terms of the idea.
Yeah, what I think is really good with the title that you have is that it challenges those initial beliefs that people have with Notion. I think when you look at Brian's video of AG1. Brian is this authority figure that people look to for advice, but AG1 is kind of glorified by a lot of the big YouTubers who are sponsored by it. And obviously the reason that Brian explains why is because they're getting paid a ton of money to do so. And so when you have these, this conflict in authority questioning something that's meant to be perfect, the viewers click. I think with Alex and Andra, it's slightly different because Alex and Andra are not to Brian's level within their niche at this particular moment. But because of the packaging that you had when you first launched, you had two different types of thumbnails. You had the one which we'll talk about, which is the red background with the Notion in the middle. But then you also had another thumbnail that leveraged experts. It had Matt Diavella, Ali Abdaal, and Thomas Frank, if I remember correctly.
It wasn't Matt Diavella, it was Jeff Su, but yeah, the other
okay.
ones. Yeah.
And like they're obviously very big for Notion. Like a lot of them, like Thomas Frank has an entire channel built around Notion and it kind of being the tool that can do everything. And so, yeah, I think like that's kind of what worked there in that setting up the expectations that this tool that has been lauded around for years as the ultimate productivity tool is suddenly not good and it's failed you. So yeah, I find like the packaging really good in terms of the expectations, and then obviously the hook as well, which really twists the knife into like how Notion is not the best use for every single thing in your life.
Yeah, well, maybe that's a good time to talk about the packaging in full. So the place that I started with this, because I knew we were going against the grain, as I've said, I wanted to see whether anyone else had really been popular making a video about this topic with this negative framing of the topic. And I was, unsurprised to find not loads, but the ones that I did find had some really, really interesting kind of conspiracy-like angles to them. So we've got this one here from Productive Setups, the lies that Notion YouTubers are feeding you. I don't actually remember the contents of this video per se. This packaging is a little bit too conspiracy, a little bit too like there's something terrible under the surface going on. Like we didn't want to be as bombastic as that. We wanted this to be, like just a true representation of their opinions. But there was something about this angle that I found really, really interesting. It's like, there's, again, somebody is kind of half in shadow. They've got their finger on their lips. There's this big, bold text that says the truth. And I knew that there was something to that kind of image. So I didn't know what I was going to do with it yet, but just took a screenshot and kept it on side. Then I found a guy who you may have heard of called Enrico Tartarotti, and his thumbnails are just lovely. They're the sort of really simplified kind of like Apple Store kind of vibe that he creates with his thumbnails. They're really, really stripped back. One of them happened to be about Notion, so I found that's the way I found him. It's called Why Everyone is Obsessed with Notion. So this angle felt a little bit nicer to me. Again, it was less conspiracy, less kind of aggressive, but it still speaks to that same feeling of like people are obsessed with this thing. The opinion is set that this is the way the world is. And so I really, really like that. And it's quite simply the Notion block on screen, and text next to it says The Secret Psychology of Notion.
Yeah, I really like that packaging because as a viewer, the expectation is that there's this secret psychology and that I'm obsessed with Notion and something's going on that I'm not quite aware of. And so there's this perceived knowledge gap that if I click it, I could learn why that's happened and how I can essentially protect myself from it.
All right. That's it in the abstract, but step by step, what were you actually doing to come up with the ideas?
So yeah, initially I literally just searched the word Notion on both YouTube search and 1of10.com. And on 1of10, what that does is it brings up the outlier videos associated with that word. So an outlier video is just a video that is performing well compared to the recent average on that channel. And so that's how I very, very quickly found, again, at the time, the lies that Notion YouTubers are feeding you is a 43x outlier for the channel. I could see from looking at that, the channel had only 15K subs, which is around what Efficient App had at the time. And this video had gotten 136,000 views at the time, which is probably a lot more by now. And likewise, Enrico Tartarotti's video, it was a 14x outlier. This video got 443,000 views at the time versus a 30K average. So I knew that these two videos were really, really, there was something about the packaging or something within the video that had made them perform well. So taking those as inspiration, that's when I moved on to the next phase, which was hand drawing the thumbnails for this. I know you do this, Jamie. I'm not sure, Gwilym, maybe you do as well when you're thinking of packaging.
Yes, I do really terrible drawings, yeah.
Yes, yeah, likewise. But we can see in these two examples that I've got here, I think you could probably see the inspiration that comes from the videos we were talking about above. So the lies that Notion YouTubers are feeding you, that's where I've got this mock-up of these three faces on the right-hand side with their eyes scribbled out. It's like quite a classic conspiracy style you see with the eyes like scratched out. Notion logo in the middle, and then again taking that phrase, the truth. So these components are very, very similar to that thumbnail above, but they've just been remixed in a slightly different order. I think this weird egg on the left was supposed to be representing Alex or Andra. In the end, we got rid of their face because it was just a bit too crowded. But that's the more conspiracy angle. But what I really was like the most excited about was this one on the right. Again, it's not drawn fantastically, but the really stripped back approach that I'd seen in Enrico's thumbnails really, really spoke to me. And they stood out so much on the homepage. They weren't really like thumbnails that a lot of channels are doing. And I know we often share this in our WhatsApp group. When we find a channel that just has like a really unusual set of thumbnails, it's always worth sharing. And so I think that's something to keep an eye out for while you're scrolling YouTube. But there was this other video on Enrico's channel that was called it's something to do with Google. It's called What Happened to Google Search. And the thumbnail is the Google logo melting. And the text is why you can't find anything. And I really like this idea of, again, like authority logo, but something about it is not right. So in Google's case, it was melting. I thought, what if we had the Notion block, but it was all cracked and like the ground underneath it is cracking and bits of the logo are chipping off. And it implies the opinion that Alex and Andra have of the app. So this was the starting place. Drawing thumbnails is just like a really easy way to get those concepts out of your brain. So the next phase for me in coming up with thumbnails is then mocking it up in Canva, which you can do for free. These were the two like versions of this that we got. So again, it just like gives this a thumbnail designer a little bit more clarity on what you're going for. I like to serve them both the hand-drawn thing and the Canva mockup, but this is what we had, and eventually handed those over to two different thumbnail designers. And yeah, these were the two that we got. So we had Ike Design, who came up with the one on the left, and Antioch did the one on the right, which you can see is ultimately the one which won the A/B test. And we ended up with a kind of red variant of that ended up performing the best out of everything. So that's the packaging.
So is there anything that you learned from this process that you would tell someone else to apply to their own channel if they want to get an outlier video?
Yeah, I think one major thing, and maybe this is something that people are already thinking about, but is to make sure that the two concepts that you're A/B testing are really substantially different in terms of their how they come across. So in this case here, right, we've got this slightly darker conspiracy style, people's faces version, and then we've got this slightly cleaner, more intriguing, minimalist, icon-based thing. And that just gives you a really good place to start with when you're doing the testing, because we've definitely, with other videos that I worked on in the past, if you go too hard down the angle of like both these thumbnails, while they may be different, are ultimately conveying something very, very similar. If neither of them work, then you're kind of stuck and the video is already live, and it's hard to A/B test your way out of that. So having two very distinct options at the start and then variants of those is definitely very interesting.
I have occasionally gone for the one that underperformed just very, very slightly. Never if it's a big difference, but one that underperformed if I feel like that option represents the channel better. Just because I think there is a thing that you can't quite put your finger on, that where there is a different type of audience that is attracted to a different type of thumbnail. And sometimes you want to go for people who like the clean, minimalist thing and just interested in the idea here, for example, of just Notion. Do I want that or not? As opposed to, oh, Thomas Frank, click.
Yeah, that's so true. And actually, in this specific scenario, I think one thing that I've learned over the process of the last 6 months and getting to be more into like the strategy stuff as opposed to just the script writing stuff is looking at your click-through rate from different traffic sources. So in the case of this video here, right, I believe we're getting suggested traffic from videos from Thomas Frank Explains and things like that. And that is clearly a pipeline of viewers who are fans of Thomas Frank being ported over to our video where we're kind of hating on the thing that Thomas Frank loves. And so then the question arises of, do we want to optimize packaging where we get a high click-through rate from Thomas Frank fans, or do we want to optimize for, the kind of small business owners, startup founders that we're ultimately targeting with this channel? So that's another really big thing is don't look at your click-through rate as, in its totality. Maybe take a look into the different traffic sources and see what am I actually trying to optimize for with my packaging.
So George, what I want you to break down here for me is the packaging and the hook, because clearly one came before the other. And the issue that some people have when they're A/B testing their titles and thumbnails is that it no longer aligns with the hook. And because you had two very distinct thumbnails here, one that was a little bit more controversial, using other YouTubers and kind of like canceling them in a way by having these red lines over their eyes, compared to the more simplified Forget Notion thumbnail. How did you balance that within the hook? Because obviously, if the hook went too much on the YouTuber side of things and how they've been lying to you, like the previous packaging suggested, how would that have worked had the Forget Notion thumbnail won? Did you think about that, or is it kind of just it performed because you wrote it in like a general way that spoke to both sets of titles and thumbnails?
The process of this is that the thumbnail concept came first, but it had gotten to about the like Canva mock-up stage by the time I was then writing the hook. And so I think I had both of them in mind while I was doing it. I don't know if that's always going to be possible, but I think, you know, on one hand, like we said, it's important to have distinct concepts for the packaging, but if you have those concepts already mocked up, it's then thinking, okay, and I think about this when I'm writing my newsletter every week, when I'm A/B testing the heading, it's like, do both of these fairly represent what is actually going to be in this video and what's in the hook and everything? So I think it's important to think about while you're doing it. In my case, I knew that the title seemed like a real banger and we didn't have many variations on that title. And so I think with that fixed title, I knew that that would represent the hook very, very clearly. I think that the title in that video is so kind of punch you in the face that might be the thing that actually gets you to click maybe more than the thumbnail in this case, because it's so, yeah, sort of interesting. But yeah, I was thinking about it. I had the mock-ups of both and I made sure that like, okay, do we have something that references the YouTubers if the YouTube face thumbnail wins, but also, you know, I think naturally because the Cracked Notion logo was the other one, that was always going to be represented in the hook because it was very much at the core of the idea. But there are some interesting things that came from this. So I think it helped being able to show the editors, okay, here are the two final concepts that we have. For this video, we had someone called Amy, Awkward Amy, who used to edit for Legal Eagle, who was editing this. And she was really, really good at taking elements of these thumbnail designs and making sure they were included in the video. So we had lots of B-roll of Ali, of Jeff Su, of Thomas Frank throughout that intro, which, you know, would have accounted for that particular thumbnail winning. But then actually, because we had the finalized design of the Cracked logo thumbnail done, we were able to use that logo asset in the hook itself. So that created a really nice congruency between it, as it was, that thumbnail won. So if you've clicked on the Notion logo thumbnail and then in the hook you see that exact same logo sort of moving around the screen, it feels like, oh wow, they've really thought about this. Either way would have been a win in this case. It just so happened that the Cracked logo won the A/B test.
Yeah, I think that's a good extension of honoring the click. So you not only see what you clicked for, but the style of the video is also in the style that you clicked for.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And that's probably a good time to talk about the hook itself. So I don't think this hook is perfect, but like you say, the style that the thumbnail evoked, especially the simplistic Cracked logo one, was kind of like a Netflix trailer. And so as these designs were sort of moving from mock-up to completion, meanwhile, I was kind of drafting the hook with Alex and Andra, the more it felt like, okay, we can kind of break some traditional hook rules here because A, this is a really, you know, like punchy topic, and B, the thumbnail is kind of so shocking in a way and so like grabs the eye. We felt like we wanted this hook to be a little bit longer than a, so welcome to this video, and in today's content, we're going to be talking about why Notion isn't so great for these things. It was like, no, we want this to feel like you've landed on a Netflix trailer. Let's talk a little bit about it. I can tell you what my thinking was, but also where we could have, you know, done a little better. All right, so let's just jump into the hook and I'll give you my thoughts as we go.
You were told that Notion's the solution to everything, but you were sold a lie.
Okay, so immediate punchy opener. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts on that, if that did anything for you.
I think it's good in that it puts the viewer in the position of the person who has been wronged and who has been misled by an evil or other party, which could be Notion or which could be Thomas Frank or Ali Abdaal. And yeah, it ups the conflict ante immediately.
Yeah, it makes me lean in to wonder, like, okay, how have they lied to me? What is it that you're about to reveal?
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the intent. I think especially going with the, you were told it's the solution to everything. We wanted to make sure we were calling out something recognizable and to immediately have that feeling of like, oh yeah, I do use Notion for everything. Oh, but I was sold, what do you mean I was sold a lie? So that's the first bit. Then there's a lot of collaboration between us and Amy here with the editing. She took a lot of liberties with this hook, which was really cool and just kind of helped elevate it.
On the surface, Notion looks like the all-in-one answer to run everything in your business. You have to-do lists, project management, CRMs, databases, team wikis, notes, and now even calendar and email.
Okay. So this next bit, again, we just wanted to double down on, I guess just my thinking was like reminding you of all the things you might be using Notion for. I think Notion just becomes this thing that you don't even think about. It's just like, yeah, I like run my life off of it. Of course it is. That's just what it is. But I wanted to really, really call out the specific things and make sure we were catching anyone who's watching this, that we definitely had covered your use case to make it feel like we're talking to you, if that makes sense.
I think you're doing something here, which is what I tell people to do quite often, which is don't speak to people as if they don't know the thing. Just launch into it. Say all the same stuff that you would say if you're like, Notion is a product that offers this, 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 and this, but just say it in a way that you're assuming knowledge, but you're also imparting it, so that you're not making the audience feel stupid or uninformed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's true. Okay, then next we do something here that is a little bit odd, but I'll just show you it.
Hold on. This is so messed up, Andra.
Come play with us, Alex.
Okay, we're going to come back to the last two because...
Okay, so at this point, I mean, it may be a rarity with some channels is that we have two hosts. And so there's this double thought of like, A, we want to introduce both of them in the hook so it's not weird, I guess, where if somebody else shows up later. But also I wanted to, I guess when I was scripting it, like give this sense that like the second host almost can't wait for the hook to finish before having to be like, no, wait, there's something like so dodgy going on here that I have to tell you about it now. So that was kind of what we were going for with that bit.
I love the switch. I think it's really nice. It's kind of gives me energy, and it makes me feel like, oh, they're not just going to flow along in a consistent way. But what confused me was what Alex is talking about afterwards. It wasn't kind of clear to me.
This is the thing that I'm always trying to hit on with my script writing students is like, not trying to hit on my script writing students, something I'm trying to impress upon them is this idea of like being curiosity inducing without being so vague that it doesn't mean anything. And maybe we strayed too far onto that side in this case. But in any case, marching on.
Because Notion is not telling you the full story here.
I go on YouTube, I go on TikTok. There are thousands and thousands of tutorials of people explaining how to use Notion without going crazy.
After pouring...
Okay. A few things going on there. So this is where we come back to that thing I was talking about where we're trying to balance both concepts. So we wanted to make sure in that first 30-ish seconds, we were getting in pictures of the YouTubers who are in the thumbnail in case that thumbnail happened to win. But you can see we then very quickly cut to this next shot where I think this is on one of the last passes. Amy then threw in the Notion block that we had in the other thumbnail.
I'd say at this point, one of the things I like, you're 30 seconds in, which is quite a lengthy hook, but it to me doesn't feel like a hook. It's kind of like I think it's the editing as well that really has helped this in that it doesn't feel like I've been preached at. And in this video, we're going to talk about XYZ. It feels like I'm already into the video, but it was still in the hook. It's like this really nice documentary-esque beginning to the video where it feels like we already have momentum and we're just getting into this story that you're about to break down to us. But I already feel like I'm kind of getting value a little bit. Like you've really set up this video in a nice way where I know there's going to be a pretty satisfying payoff.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm glad that comes across. And huge props to Amy for this, because there was some B-roll and kind of editing suggestions that I put into the script, but she really took on this idea of like, well, you'll see it in a second. There's this kind of Alice in Wonderland-like metaphor, which she has going on visually. This is also a reference to The Shining. Maybe we went tiny bit overboard on like the different references, but I think it's kind of fun. But in any case, let's carry on.
Hours into creating the perfect Notion system, the more it feels like you can't leave. And then again, why would you want to leave? Because Notion is awesome, right?
You know what I mean? Have you ever organized something to perfection because it gave you something productive to do, but then when it was all said and done, it was not actually functional in the way that you need it to be so that you feel like you can keep up with it all?
Yeah, we need to talk.
Okay, so what we're trying to do there is just escalate it. Again, we're showing them recognizable things and things like, yeah, okay, so I built this and then I did have to build that and then blah, blah, blah. And then eliciting this sense of like, the more time you put into it, the more it feels like you can't leave, because all of a sudden your whole life, your business, your work is all tied up in this one thing, which is where I like Amy's idea for this Alice in Wonderland thing, where it's like you're like looking over into the hole and then you fall down that rabbit hole.
So I feel like the action point here for someone watching is, if you're talking about a problem that the viewer has, really flesh it out and make them relive what it's like to have that problem in the moment. So it's like, you're not converting any leads for your business. You open up Stripe every day, you look at your email clicks, everything is going down, everything is red. We know what that feels like. It is much better than just assuming that they are in that state of mind at that moment.
Yeah, I like that. And it's like positioning yourself as a friend to them. It's not you telling them off for feeling this. It's like, no, that this is kind of by design and you're not alone. And
we know what it feels like.
Yeah, totally. Okay, right.
Yeah, we need to talk. There are whole videos about the psychology behind Notion and why it feels so addictive.
This is kind of overkill. I also have an extra desk next to me that has a treadmill underneath it.
This tool has tapped into a deep insecurity about our productivity, and it's marketed itself as the solution.
Notion.
So this is a point where I think maybe we double down a little too much on the escalation. I think I have mixed feelings about it, because I like continuing to emphasize like all these other YouTubers who are involved, showing Ali on the treadmill, where it's almost like the whole like productivity thing is just getting out of control, and trying to link that to Notion, if that makes sense. But in hindsight, I think maybe this was starting to double down a little bit too much on that escalation, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on it.
I mean, I feel like it's, kind of repeating some of the points that I feel like I got earlier in the hook. And I feel like the only thing I'm sort of, I should be listening to Alex and Andra. If I was a new viewer and I didn't know who they were, like there's no real introduction to them yet.
Yeah.
You brought in Alex and in like a funny, entertaining way, but it still didn't kind of say, what's the connection between these two people? Why are they authority to speak on this? And you haven't kind of mentioned, we have some alternatives, or we have other videos or our website that actually solves the problem of Notion. That's the only thing that I'd feel like it's kind of missing, or hinting at the fact that it will come later in the video.
I think you're right. Yeah, I think that's true. I think we were deliberately breaking some rules here by making it very much Notion conspiracy focused at the start. But I think, around this point where we maybe started to double down again, that would have been a good time to have potentially, brought in some of that authority. Anyway, we're marching on towards the end of this hook now. So the last 20 seconds or so.
Notion. But in reality, this app has overreached way beyond what it's actually good at.
Notion definitely lied to you.
We're going to cover every single thing that Notion is surprisingly bad at, and what software you should use instead.
There you go. So that's how it ends. That's where we finally bring in the, like, what are we actually doing in this video? I think that hook, the packaging hook congruency was very much at the forefront of our minds while we were creating the hook, but it's almost like suddenly you get to the point where, oh no, we do have to say what we're doing. So maybe, that could have just come in that tiny bit earlier. But there we are. That was the hook.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we spoke about it, or it was Alex and Andra also talking to me about it. And I think my main feedback was that I loved the hook. I loved all the things that were being done, but that the last bit that we just looked at maybe extended the same themes a bit too far. But I mean, I think this brings out something which is like, when you've planned something and you've executed it well, as the editor has and as you have in the script writing, it can be hard to cut later, even if you want to. But overall, awesome job.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was an element to which we'd edited a lot of this stuff to this specific music. It became impractical to perform too much surgery later on in the game, which is what it is. This is all kind of art and science together, right? So it's hard to always get that totally right. But yeah, I do agree. I think maybe just a little bit too long.